A man accused of killing his wife and then stuffing her body in a refrigerator. Patrick's wife, Anastasia Lambert, was found stabbed to death in 2014. Her body was stuffed into a refrigerator in an apartment in Southwest Houston.
In late November 2014, 27-year-old Anastasia Lambert, known for her warm smile and friendly greetings around her apartment complex, would suddenly vanish without a trace. It wasn't until 1 month later, on December 8th, when residents would report a foul odor coming from an apartment. But nothing could have prepared a maintenance worker for the horror story waiting inside. Inside the apartment refrigerator, he discovered a body badly decomposed, covered in multiple stab wounds to the neck, and worst of all, lifeless. As police scrambled for answers, they uncovered a devastating truth. The one behind it all had taken her 11-month-old baby and vanished. But the worst was still to come. What unfolded next spiraled into something even darker and more horrifying. This is the life and death of Anastasia Lambert. Anastasia Oaikana Lambert, originally from Lagos, Nigeria, was born in 1987. By the time she was 27 years old, she was already chasing big dreams. She earned a bachelor's degree in multimedia journalism from Ramkhamhaeng University in Thailand in 2012. She had global experience, a background in media and IT, and a voice that demanded to be heard. She wanted to build a future in broadcasting. She once described herself as a creative thinker, ambitious, curious, and determined to eventually host her own talk show. Her online presence reflected her drive and confidence. But behind the spotlight of her career goals, her personal life told a quieter, more complicated story. Anastasia had recently relocated to Houston, Texas, in the United States of America, hoping for a fresh start and a stable life for her and her young son, 11-month-old Achilles. She was living with Patrick Lambert, the man she had once loved deeply, someone she had trusted enough to build a home and a future with. But this wasn't the first time they had tried to start over. Over the years, the couple had lived in several places in the U.S., including Florida, New York, and Hawaii, constantly moving in search of stability. In June 2014, they finally settled into an apartment in Houston, trying once again to build something lasting. But behind closed doors, their relationship had grown tense and difficult. Though they shared a roof, they seemed to live in separate emotional worlds. Friends and neighbors would later describe Anastasia as outgoing and full of life. She was the type of person who made others feel welcome, a woman who smiled easily, grounded in her role as a mother, and hopeful about what lay ahead. But her husband was a stark contrast. Patrick, on the other hand, was often described as distant and cold. Some even called him controlling. He kept to himself and didn't engage much with the community. People who saw them together noticed how different their energies were, her warmth clashing with his brooding silence. To those closest to Anastasia, it was clear that something about their dynamic didn't feel right. In September 2014, just a few months after they had moved into the Houston apartment, Anastasia made a desperate call to the police. She reported that Patrick had threatened her with a knife during an argument and told officers she feared for her life. A report was filed and the incident was officially documented, but no arrest was made. No charges were brought. Whatever fear Anastasia had tried to voice that day was recorded on paper, then left to fade into the system. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In November, Patrick contacted Anastasia's employer directly. He told them Anastasia would not be returning to work. Without asking any questions or following up, her employers quietly agreed to end her employment. But a nightmare had already unfolded. After a few days, Anastasia, once regularly seen around the apartment complex with her young son, was no longer seen at all. Her neighbors, already uneasy about Patrick's controlling behavior, noticed the silence, but no one could say for sure what had happened. But that silence was finally broken in the most horrific way. On December 8, a maintenance worker at the Braeswood Oaks apartment complex where Anastasia lived was sent to investigate a foul odor that had been lingering in the building. The smell had grown stronger by the day, unsettling nearby tenants. Following the scent to a second-floor unit, The worker opened the door and stepped into what can only be described as a nightmare. What they found was beyond horrifying. Inside the apartment, investigators made a horrifying discovery. 27-year-old Anastasia's lifeless body had been stuffed into a refrigerator. Not even seasoned detectives were prepared for the brutality of what they uncovered. But the chilling discovery raised even more disturbing questions. Detectives were left piecing together a timeline, trying to determine how long Anastasia had been dead before her body was discovered. They suggested she may have been killed as long as 3 weeks earlier. By the time she was found, the stench had become overwhelming. It had only grown noticeable after the apartment's electricity was shut off on November 20 due to unpaid utility bills. Without power to mask the odor to keep the refrigerator sealed, the hidden horror began to leak into the air, forcing the truth into the open. Houston police were called to the scene. Detectives from the homicide division began examining the apartment. Blood was still visible on parts of the floor. It was only then that people began asking questions. Anastasia hadn't been seen in a week, but no one had reported her missing. With no close family nearby and no job to draw attention to her absence, her disappearance had gone unnoticed. And for days, possibly weeks, she had remained in the refrigerator. But what investigators discovered next would change everything. Anastasia had been stabbed 19 times in the neck. Her body was folded and forced into the refrigerator. The lights in the apartment stayed on. The power wasn't cut until nearly 2 months later, in late November, when unpaid bills finally triggered a shutoff. But there was one question on everyone's mind. Where was her baby? 11-month-old Achilles? And Patrick, her husband. No one heard the baby cry. Not only that, there was nothing in the apartment that indicated a child had even been there recently. No bottles, no diapers, no clothes. His crib was empty. With no sign of the child, suspicion had only one place to land. All eyes turned to Patrick. He hadn't been seen since early October. He had not returned to the apartment. He hadn't spoken to neighbors or made any contact with local acquaintances. There were no signs of him in the area. It was as if he had disappeared entirely. But one terrifying detail made the situation even more urgent. Where was 11-month-old son Achilles? With Anastasia confirmed dead and the child unaccounted for, the investigation shifted into overdrive. Authorities feared the worst. The focus turned from a homicide scene to a desperate search for a missing child. And within hours, that fear triggered a statewide alert. Soon, an Amber Alert was issued across the state. Law enforcement believed Achilles was in serious danger, and they were almost certain that Patrick had taken him. But then investigators would receive their first major lead. Investigators uncovered that Patrick had boarded a bus to Mexico just days after emailing Anastasia's employer. He had crossed the border along with the baby and vanished into another country. But the deeper detectives looked, the darker it got. Anastasia had likely been killed days before Patrick left. Her body remained hidden for 10 weeks. It didn't take long for police to connect the dots. Anastasia had made police reports in September saying Patrick had threatened her. She had last been seen around September 26th, and now Achilles had been taken across international lines, and Patrick has evaded authorities for months. The case was now more than a homicide. It was a manhunt across borders, a missing child investigation, and a scramble to bring a dangerous man back into custody. As the manhunt intensified, investigators turned to Patrick's financial records and began combing through surveillance footage from the local bus terminal. It was then that authorities were able to confirm the direction he had gone. With this new information in hand, the FBI officially joined the investigation. Under federal law, when a child of tender age goes missing under suspicious circumstances, federal agents can provide immediate assistance. In this case, with the homicide of the child's mother and the suspect fleeing the country, the conditions for involvement were met without delay. On December 12th, 4 days after the death of his mother, 11-month-old Achilles was found alive in the Mexican state of Querétaro, roughly 700 miles from the Texas border.
Investigators here with HPD telling us tonight that 11-month-old Achilles Lambert was found after he was abandoned by his dad. His father, Patrick Lambert, was taken into custody at a different location in Mexico, and investigators have a long list of questions they have been waiting to ask him. They did. It's the news that neighbors at the Braeswood Oaks apartments have been waiting for.
At least he's safe, thank God.
This baby boy found in good condition in Querétaro, Mexico, putting an end to an Amber Alert that had so many people worried for his well-being.
I'm just glad that they found the baby and he was still alive. Thank you, Jesus. That's all I can say.
Authorities located him and placed him in the custody of Mexican Child Protective Services. He was in good physical condition and appeared unharmed. The exact circumstances of how Achilles was found weren't made public, but officials confirmed that he had been abandoned by Patrick at some point after their arrival in Mexico. Neighbors in Houston, many of whom had feared the worst, expressed relief when news of the baby's recovery was announced.
Just glad that they found the baby and he was still alive. Thank you, Jesus. That's all I can say.
Some who knew Anastasia described her as kind-hearted and didn't deserve what happened to her. But the story wasn't over yet. Where was Patrick? At approximately 5:30 p.m., just a few hours after Achilles was recovered, Patrick was found. He was located in another part of Mexico, though authorities declined to reveal the exact location or the process used to identify him. He was arrested by Mexican authorities with FBI agents coordinating alongside them. He was taken into custody without resistance. On December 17, Patrick was officially returned to Houston. Upon arrival, he was taken into custody and placed under arrest, no longer a fugitive, but now facing justice for the horror he left behind. During questioning, he offered no useful information. Investigators later stated that he declined to assist and provided no insight into his role in the events. He was booked into the Harris County Jail without bond. The evidence against him had already begun to take shape. Detectives reviewed phone records, financial transactions, travel logs, and statements from neighbors. They also collected forensic evidence from the apartment. Blood was found on the floor near the refrigerator. Her body had been sealed inside for weeks. The full picture was only beginning to form. Achilles was eventually placed in the care of Patrick's parents, his paternal grandparents, while the case moved forward. Child welfare authorities worked with legal representatives to ensure his safety, but no further public details about his care have been shared. In the meantime, law enforcement and prosecutors began preparing for trial. What remained was to hold Patrick accountable for what had happened inside their apartment. Patrick chose to represent himself in court. He declined the assistance of a defense attorney and took full control of his legal defense, arguing that he didn't know who had killed Anastasia. During the trial, he maintained that the investigation had not fully explored other possibilities and accused the state of targeting him without evidence of guilt. But what came out during the proceedings left little room for doubt. Prosecutors presented a timeline of events beginning in September 2014. Anastasia was last seen alive on September 26. 2 days later, Patrick emailed her employer stating she would not be returning to work. On September 30, he boarded a bus with their son and left the country, after his wife, the mother of his child, was in the refrigerator. Her body remained undiscovered until December 8, when maintenance workers found her inside the refrigerator. But the timeline was only part of the story. The jury also heard about Anastasia's police reports. In the weeks leading up to her death, she had contacted Houston police more than once to report threats from Patrick, including the incident with a knife. After examining the full case, the jurors would come to a unanimous conclusion. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Patrick guilty of murder. Patrick was sentenced to life in prison.
Breaking developments in a story that we've been following for years. The verdict is in for a man accused of killing his wife and then stuffing her body in a refrigerator. The jury found Patrick Lambert guilty of murder. And just moments ago, we've learned that he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Patrick's wife, Anastasia Lambert, was found stabbed to death in 2014. Her body was stuffed into a refrigerator in an apartment in Southwest Houston. In addition to the life sentence, Lambert has to pay a $10,000 fine.
In his closing statement during sentencing, Patrick said that he had failed to protect Anastasia. He did not admit guilt, but acknowledged that he had let her and her family down. Meanwhile, Achilles remained in the care of his paternal grandparents. No further public details were released about his transition or current status, but his physical safety had been secured. Back in Houston, the news of Patrick's conviction brought a mix of reactions. For neighbors who had once seen Anastasia walking through the halls with a smile, the sentence was a long-awaited moment of accountability. Some remembered the silence that had surrounded the apartment in those weeks following her disappearance. Others spoke about the fear and sadness that followed the Amber Alert.
He had stuff still there, you know what I'm saying? So at any time he could have came back. But I'm very happy that I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Neighbors now end their week with relief.
The outcome of the case also raised concerns about how prior warnings were handled. Anastasia's reports to police had not resulted in charges. There had been no protective orders issued, and by the time her body was found, nearly 10 weeks had passed. Law enforcement officials credited the cooperation between U.S. and Mexican authorities for helping to locate both Patrick and Achilles. The FBI, Houston police, and agencies in Mexico had worked together to track Patrick down and bring him back to face charges. But for many, the larger questions remain. Anastasia was loved deeply, and she tried to protect herself the best way she could. She reached out for help, but help never came. Achilles will grow up without the mother who loved him most. Her family will live with a loss no one should have to bear. And for those of us watching, this story is a reminder of how urgent it is to listen, to act, and to protect. To Anastasia's family, our deepest condolences. We are so sorry for your loss. Your pain matters, and her life will not be forgotten. Rest in peace, Anastasia. What do you think about this story? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.